They dragged Eleanor to the pit to die. Then suddenly the Alpha King's voice ripped through the arena and froze the blade midair, and the executioner trembled. Why would a king halt death for a girl he should despise? Before we begin, share where you're watching from in the comments, and when the story concludes, give it a rating from 0 to 10. Ready? Let's get started. Eleanor Conrad's bare feet dragged across the frozen mud as the Iron Fang guards hauled her forward. Iron shackles bit into her wrists, the chains clinking with each stumbling step. Her thin dress, once gray and clean, now hung in tatters stained with blood and dirt. "Keep moving, traitor," one guard snarled, shoving her hard between the shoulder blades. She fell to her knees, and the crowd that lined the road erupted in jeers. Rotten vegetables splattered against her back. Children threw stones. Their mothers spat curses. Eleanor kept her eyes on the ground, trying to block out the hatred, trying to remember how this nightmare had begun. 3 days ago, she'd been nobody, just the quiet Omega who gathered herbs for the healer's tent, who kept her head down and her voice softer. The girl who survived by being invisible. Then came the ambush. She'd been serving water to the border patrol when shadows exploded from the tree line. Screams. Blood. The metallic clash of claws against armor. Eleanor had hidden behind supply crates, trembling and useless, while warriors died around her. When dawn broke, she was the only one left breathing. Pack leader Thorn had arrived with reinforcements, his cold eyes scanning the massacre. He'd found her curled in the dirt, sobbing, covered in others' blood, but without a scratch on her own body. "Omega," he'd said, the word like poison on his tongue. "How convenient that you alone survived." She'd tried to explain, tried to tell them she'd hidden, that she'd been too weak to fight, that she'd seen nothing. But Thorn's warriors had surrounded her, and his beta had grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. "She led them here," Thorn declared. "This worthless Omega sold us out to save her own hide." The beating that followed had been swift and brutal. When they'd finished, Thorn had carved the rejection mark into her shoulder with his own claws, 3 jagged lines that burned like liquid fire. The mark that severed her from Pack, from protection, from mercy. "Take her to Ironwood," he'd ordered. "Let the capital deal with traitors." A sharp yank on her chain snapped Eleanor back to the present. The road had widened, and ahead loomed the gray stone walls of Ironwood's capital. Her breath caught in her throat. The execution pit. She'd heard stories. Everyone had. A massive crater in the center of the city where condemned wolves met their end before thousands of spectators. It was where justice, or what passed for it, was delivered with an axe. "No," Eleanor whispered, her legs locking. "Please, I didn't." Silence. The guard backhanded her across the face, and she tasted copper. As they dragged her through the city gates, a strange heat pulsed on her left wrist. Eleanor glanced down through tear-blurred vision and saw it, a mark she'd never noticed before, glowing faintly beneath the grime. It looked almost like a wolf's head, crowned in silver light. The sensation intensified with her terror, burning hotter with each step toward the pit. The crowd's roar grew deafening as Eleanor was hauled onto the wooden platform. Below stretched the gaping execution pit, its depths dark and hungry. The mob pressed closer, their faces twisted with bloodlust. Death to the traitor. Kill the Omega. Eleanor's legs gave out, and she collapsed at the platform's edge. Through the sea of hatred, she caught sight of the executioner approaching, a massive figure in dark robes, carrying an axe that gleamed in the gray morning light. The chanting grew louder, shaking the very stones beneath her. And somewhere deep inside, where her broken wolf cowered, something ancient stirred and whispered, "Not yet." The executioner's shadow fell across Eleanor like a shroud. She lifted her head, forcing herself to look at the hooded figure towering above her. His axe was enormous, iron-blackened by countless executions, its curved blade catching the pale morning light. The guards on either side of her tightened their grip on her arms, forcing her upright. Her knees buckled, but they held her in place, presenting her to the crowd like a sacrifice. "Any last words, Omega?" the executioner asked, his voice muffled beneath his hood. Eleanor's throat constricted. Words clawed their way up, desperate and raw. "I didn't do it," she gasped. "Please, just let me speak. Let me explain what happened." "Traitor," someone screamed from the crowd. "Omega filth. Let her blood water the pit." The chanting resumed, louder than before, a wall of hatred that crushed the air from her lungs. No one cared about her truth. No one wanted to hear it. In Ironwood, Omegas had no voice. They had no worth. They had no mercy. The executioner raised the axe high above his head, muscles straining beneath his robes. Eleanor's vision tunneled. Time slowed to a crawl. She could see every nick in the blade, every rust stain, every. The mark on her wrist exploded with searing heat. She cried out, but the sound was lost in the roar of the mob. The executioner's shoulders tensed. The axe began its descent, whistling through the air toward her exposed neck. "Stop." The word cracked across the arena like thunder. The executioner froze mid-swing, the blade trembling inches from Eleanor's throat. The crowd's roar died instantly, cut off as if someone had severed its throat. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Slowly, she turned her head toward the voice. A rider emerged from the crowd, mounted on a massive black warhorse, its eyes gleaming red in the morning light. The man atop it wore dark armor that seemed to drink in the light, polished to a razor's edge. A crimson cloak billowed behind him like spilled blood. But it was his face that made Eleanor's wolf whimper in primal recognition. Sharp features carved from stone. Dark hair swept back from a high forehead. Eyes like winter storms, gray, cold, merciless. A crown of black iron rested on his brow. Alpha King Marcus Valerius. The entire square dropped to their knees as one, including the guards holding Eleanor. She collapsed forward, her chains rattling, the only one still partially upright because she physically couldn't bow any lower. Marcus dismounted with lethal grace, his boots striking the platform with measured thuds. The crowd remained silent. Even breathing seemed forbidden in his presence. He approached Eleanor slowly, deliberately, like a predator circling wounded prey. She kept her eyes downcast, terror freezing her in place. "Look at me," he commanded. Eleanor's head snapped up against her will, meeting those storm-gray eyes. They were utterly unreadable, no warmth, no curiosity, nothing human at all. Marcus reached down and seized her left wrist, yanking it up for inspection. His grip was iron, unyielding. The mark on her skin pulsed brighter under his scrutiny, the silver wolf head sigil now clearly visible. His eyes narrowed fractionally. "Interesting." Eleanor's voice came out as a broken whisper. "Please, Your Majesty, I'm innocent." Silence. The word was soft but absolute. Marcus released her wrist and turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying across the arena with devastating authority. "This Omega is no longer subject to pack justice. As of this moment, she is the property of the crown. She will be taken to the royal fortress for questioning." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The executioner lowered his axe, confusion evident in his posture. "But Your Majesty," one of the guards stammered, "she's been condemned for treason." Marcus's gaze cut to him, and the man's words died instantly. "Are you questioning your king?" "And no, Your Majesty." "Then chain her to my horse. We leave immediately." As guards scrambled to obey, Marcus leaned down, his lips near Eleanor's ear. His breath was cold against her skin. "You belong to me now, Omega. Whether that's mercy or damnation, you'll soon discover." He straightened and walked back to his horse, leaving Eleanor trembling on the scaffold. The crowd remained kneeling, silent as graves. And Eleanor, wrists still bound, chains now attached to the king's saddle, wondered with dawning horror if she'd just escaped death, or been claimed by something far worse. Ironwood Fortress rose from the mountainside like a scar carved into stone. Black walls stretched towards storm-heavy clouds, their surfaces studded with iron spikes. Massive wolf statues flanked the gates, their eyes rubies that seemed to track Eleanor's approach with malevolent hunger. Marcus hadn't spoken during the journey. He'd ridden ahead while Eleanor stumbled behind, her chains rattling with each agonizing step. Guards surrounded her on all sides, their expressions carved from the same unforgiving stone as the fortress itself. When they finally stopped in the courtyard, a woman in severe gray robes approached. Her face was narrow, her lips pressed into a bloodless line. "Chamberlain Iris," Marcus said, dismounting. "Prepare quarters in the East Tower. The Omega is not to leave them without direct orders from me." The woman's gaze raked over Eleanor with undisguised disgust. "Yes, Your Majesty." Marcus turned to Eleanor, his storm-gray eyes pinning her in place. "You will obey these rules without exception. Speak only when spoken to. Never look me or any ranked wolf in the eyes. Do not attempt to shift. Do not leave your quarters. Disobedience will be answered with immediate consequences." Eleanor's throat tightened. She managed a jerky nod. "Verbal acknowledgement," Marcus demanded. "Why, yes, Your Majesty." The words scraped out, barely audible. He studied her for another moment, his expression clinical, as if she were a specimen under glass. Then he turned and strode toward the main keep, his crimson cloak snapping behind him. Chamberlain Iris seized Eleanor's arm, nails biting through the thin fabric.
"Come, Omega."
"Try not to dirty the floors more than necessary." The East Tower room was small and cold, furnished with only a narrow cot, a wash basin, and a single barred window. Eleanor collapsed onto the cot the moment the door slammed shut, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. But sleep brought no peace. Voices whispered just beyond hearing, threading through her dreams like smoke. She saw shadows moving in patterns she couldn't understand, felt the earth trembling beneath feet she didn't possess. The mark on her wrist burned, pulsing in rhythm with something ancient and vast. In the corridor outside, servants' voices drifted through the door. "Can't believe he brought her here. Did you see the mark? That's the lost Howler sigil, I swear it. She should have died at the pit. Whatever she is, it's not natural." King's playing with fire. Their footsteps faded, leaving Eleanor alone with the voices in her head. That night, the vision came. Eleanor stood on a battlefield choked with ash and bodies. The sky bled red. In the center of the carnage, a massive wolf stood watching her, its fur silver as moonlight, its eyes burning with an intelligence that felt older than mountains. It opened its jaws, and instead of sound, power rippled outward in visible waves. Warriors dropped to their knees. Alphas bowed their heads. The world itself seemed to bend. The wolf's gaze locked onto Eleanor. "Remember," it commanded, the word bypassing her ears and carving itself directly into her soul. Eleanor's eyes snapped open. She tried to scream, but her throat seized. The room spun violently. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. The mark on her wrist flared white-hot. Then darkness swallowed her whole, and Eleanor Conrad knew nothing more. Eleanor woke to find Marcus standing at the foot of her cot, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Morning light filtered through the barred window, painting his armor in shades of iron and shadow. "You survived the night," he observed. "Interesting." She struggled upright, keeping her eyes downcast. Every muscle ached. The mark on her wrist still tingled, though the burning had faded to a dull throb. The training yard. Now. Marcus turned and left without waiting for acknowledgement. The courtyard was packed with warriors, all muscle and scars and predatory grace. They eyed Eleanor with open contempt as she followed Marcus to a raised platform overlooking the grounds. Lord Hadrian Voss stood in the center, barking orders. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face all sharp angles and cold ambition. When his gaze landed on Eleanor, his lip curled in disgust. "Your Majesty," Hadrian called out, inclining his head minimally. "Must we conduct drills with that watching?" "She stays," Marcus replied flatly. Hadrian's jaw tightened, but he turned back to the recruits. "You," he snapped, pointing at a young warrior barely out of adolescence. "Step forward." The boy obeyed, cradling his left wrist against his chest. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the swelling, the unnatural angle. "Your wrist is fractured," Hadrian announced. "Weakness must be purged. Defend yourself." He drew his sword. The boy's face went white. "Beta Hadrian, I can't." "Then you're worthless." Hadrian lunged. The boy stumbled backward, raising his good arm uselessly. Hadrian's blade sliced across his shoulder, drawing blood. The recruit collapsed with a cry of pain. Hadrian raised a whip from his belt. "Get up." "Stop," Eleanor whispered. No one heard her. The whip cracked through the air toward the fallen boy. "Stop." Eleanor's body moved before her mind caught up. She vaulted off the platform and threw herself between Hadrian and the recruit, her hand shooting up instinctively. The whip's leather coil wrapped around her wrist. She caught it. Hadrian's eyes widened. He yanked hard, trying to pull it free, but Eleanor's grip held firm. Heat erupted in her chest, spreading outward like wildfire. Her vision sharpened. The world slowed. Her eyes flashed silver. A wave of invisible pressure exploded from her body, rolling across the courtyard in concentric rings. Every warrior stumbled. Wolves inside their human skins whimpered and pulled back, forced into submission by something primal and absolute. Hadrian staggered, his face contorting with shock and rage. What are you?" Eleanor released the whip, gasping. The power receded as quickly as it had come, leaving her trembling and hollow. The courtyard was silent. Marcus descended from the platform slowly, his storm-gray eyes locked on Eleanor with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his armor. "War chamber," he said quietly.
Alone.
1 hour. He turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing among warriors who now looked at her not with contempt, but with fear. The war chamber was a cavernous room dominated by a massive stone table carved with territorial maps. Weapons lined the walls: swords, axes, spears, each one stained with history Eleanor didn't want to imagine. Marcus stood with his back to her, staring at a faded tapestry depicting wolves in battle. He didn't turn when she entered. "Close the door." Eleanor obeyed, her hands trembling. The silence stretched like a blade against her throat. "My father believed in compassion," Marcus said finally, his voice hollow. "He thought strength and mercy could coexist. He protected the weak, gave sanctuary to omegas, opened our borders to refugees." He turned, and for the first time, Eleanor saw something crack in that stone facade, something raw and bleeding. They came at night. The Blackridge Pack, wolves he'd offered peace. They slaughtered everyone. My mother, my sisters, warriors who'd served us for generations. They left my father alive just long enough to watch his pack burn. Eleanor's breath caught. "I was 12, Marcus continued. "Hadrian found me in the ashes. He taught me the only lesson that mattered. Mercy kills. Compassion is a weapon your enemies will use to destroy you." His storm-gray eyes fixed on her. "I built this kingdom on that truth. I became the alpha no one would dare exploit." He moved closer, reaching for a wrist. Eleanor flinched, but didn't pull away. His thumb traced the silver mark on her skin. "The lost Howler sigil," he murmured. "A suppressed omega, born under a blood moon, whose power flows backward, forcing dominance into submission instead of the other way around." His grip tightened fractionally. "The prophecy says this wolf will either end a kingdom or save it." Eleanor's voice came out barely above a whisper. Which do you think I am? Marcus's jaw clenched. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his face. Fear, longing, something she couldn't name. I don't know, he admitted. And that terrifies me more than any enemy I've ever faced. He released her abruptly and strode toward the door, his armor clanking with each step. Your Majesty. Return to your quarters, he commanded without looking back. Speak of this to no one. The door slammed behind him, leaving Eleanor alone in the war chamber, her wrist still warm from his touch, her mind spinning with the weight of a prophecy she'd never asked to carry. Marcus left for the northern border 3 days later, taking half the garrison with him. Hadrian remained behind as regent, his cold gaze tracking Eleanor whenever their paths crossed. But without Marcus's watchful presence, something shifted in the fortress. It started small. A servant girl collapsed in the kitchen, clutching her burned hand. Eleanor had been fetching water when she heard the sobs. Before she could stop herself, she knelt beside the girl, examining the injury. Let me help, Eleanor whispered. The girl's eyes went wide with fear, but Eleanor had already wrapped the burn in clean cloth soaked with herbs she'd salvaged from the garden. Within minutes, the girl's tears stopped. Thank you, she breathed, staring at Eleanor like she'd witnessed a miracle. Word spread quietly. A soldier with a festering wound sought her out in the shadows. Twin pups, separated from their mother during a raid, cried themselves sick until Eleanor sat with them through the night, humming old lullabies she'd learned in her forgotten childhood. The fortress, built on brutality and fear, began to exhale. Warriors who'd sneered at her now nodded when she passed. Servants left small offerings at her door: bread, clean bandages, a patched blanket. The East Tower, once her prison, became a sanctuary others sought when the weight of Ironwood's cruelty became too much to bear. Even the stone walls seemed less oppressive, as if Eleanor's presence was a crack letting light seep through. But Hadrian watched from the shadows, his rage growing with each passing day. In his private chambers, he pored over ancient texts stolen from the royal archives. His finger traced faded illustrations of a silver wolf, its eyes blazing with unholy power. The lost howler commands through absence, stripping dominance from alphas, rendering their strength meaningless. In her presence, hierarchy collapses. All wolves become equal. Hadrian's hand curled into a fist, crumpling the parchment. Equality. The word was poison. Without hierarchy, without the natural order that elevated the strong above the weak, the kingdom would crumble. Marcus was already softening. He'd seen it in the king's eyes when he looked at the Omega girl. If Eleanor lived, everything Hadrian had built would fall. He summoned 2 of his most loyal shadows, wolves who owed him blood debts, whose faces no one would recognize. The Omega in the East Tower, Hadrian said quietly. She dies tonight. Make it look like an accident. Grief-stricken, she threw herself from the window. The assassins bowed and melted into the darkness. Hadrian returned to his wine, a cruel smile playing at his lips. By morning, the problem would be solved. The ambush came without warning. Marcus had been riding the northern ridge with a small patrol when shadows erupted from the tree line.
Claws. Fangs.
The metallic clash of steel against bone. His warriors fell quickly, too quickly, and Marcus realized with cold certainty that this was no random attack. Someone had known exactly where he'd be. The blade caught him between armor plates, sliding into his ribs with surgical precision.
Silver.
He felt it immediately, the burning spread of poison through his veins, turning his blood to acid. His attacker melted back into the darkness before Marcus could see their face. He collapsed onto his horse, barely maintaining consciousness. Home, he rasped, tangling his fingers in the animal's mane. Ironwood. The warhorse ran through the night, carrying its dying king across frozen earth. Dawn was breaking when Marcus reached the gates. He slid from the saddle and hit the ground hard, snow cushioning his fall. Blood spread beneath him in a crimson stain. "The king!" someone shouted. "Get the healers!" Soldiers swarmed, their voices distant and distorted. Marcus's vision tunneled. His wolf thrashed inside him, poisoned and panicking, tearing at his insides as it tried to heal what couldn't be healed. Through the chaos, Marcus forced words past his lips. "Eleanor, where is—" A guard leaned closer. "Your Majesty, bring Eleanor." Marcus's hand shot out, gripping the man's armor with surprising strength. "The Omega, bring her now." Eleanor was running before the guard finished speaking. She burst into the courtyard still in her nightdress, feet bare against frozen stone. Marcus lay surrounded by healers who worked frantically, their faces grim. Silver poisoning. Even for an alpha, survival was uncertain. "Move," Eleanor commanded, and to her own shock, they obeyed. She dropped to her knees beside Marcus, pressing her hands against his wound. His skin was fire-hot, his breathing shallow and ragged. His wolf was destroying him from the inside, fighting the poison so violently it was killing him faster. Eleanor closed her eyes and reached for that strange power she didn't understand. The mark on her wrist blazed white-hot. Heat poured from her palms into Marcus's chest, and she felt it, his wolf, wild and terrified, thrashing against death. "Be still," she whispered, not with words but with intention.
Trust me. Be still.
The wolf fought her, then yielded. Marcus's body went slack, his breathing evening out. The frantic thrashing stopped. His wolf submitted to her command, allowing the healer's work to actually take hold instead of fighting it. Eleanor's hands glowed with soft silver light. Somewhere deep inside, her own wolf stirred. Not weak, not broken, but ancient and knowing. She held Marcus steady through the night, her power keeping his wolf calm while poison was drawn from his veins. When dawn came, Marcus opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Eleanor's face, exhausted but fierce, her hands still pressed against his chest. "You stayed," he whispered. "I stayed," she confirmed. And Marcus understood, with terrible clarity, that he could never let her go. Eleanor woke to hands clamping over her mouth. She tried to scream, but a cloth soaked in something bitter was pressed against her face. The world tilted, and darkness claimed her. When consciousness returned, she found herself in the old dungeons beneath the fortress, stone walls slick with moisture, the air thick with decay. Iron chains bound her wrists above her head. Hadrian stood before her, torchlight casting monstrous shadows across his face. "Finally awake," he said pleasantly.
"Good.
"I want you conscious for this." Eleanor's voice came out hoarse. "Why? Why?" Hadrian laughed, cold and sharp. "Because you're destroying everything. Marcus is weak. He watches you like you're precious, like you matter." He stepped closer, his breath hot against her face. "The ambush was my design. The silver blade, the exact timing, I arranged it all. Marcus was supposed to die a hero, and I would take the throne as his loyal beta, avenging his death." Horror flooded through Eleanor. "You tried to kill him, but you saved him," Hadrian snarled. "You and your cursed Omega magic. So now I have to be more direct." He drew a blade from his belt, silver glinting in the torchlight. "When they find your body, I'll tell them the rebels infiltrated the fortress. Marcus will be grief-stricken, vulnerable. And when another convenient accident claims him, I'll finally rule as I was meant to." He raised the blade. "Hadrian!" Marcus's voice echoed through the dungeon like thunder. The beta spun around. Marcus stood at the entrance, one hand pressed against his bandaged ribs, the other gripping his sword. His face was pale, his movements stiff, but his eyes burned with absolute fury. "Step away from her." Hadrian smiled. "Or what? You can barely stand, old friend. The poison nearly killed you. You're weak. Then prove it." Hadrian's wolf surged forward, his eyes flashing gold as he launched himself at Marcus. Their swords met with a deafening clang. Marcus parried, but his wounded body betrayed him. He stumbled, and Hadrian's blade opened a cut across his shoulder. "Stop!" Eleanor screamed, yanking against her chains. The two alphas circled each other, both beginning to shift, bones cracking, muscles expanding, wolves clawing their way to the surface. Eleanor's mark erupted with searing heat. Something inside her shattered, and power flooded through her veins like a tidal wave breaking through a dam. Her wolf didn't just emerge. It detonated. A shockwave of pure force exploded from Eleanor's body, rippling outward in silver light. Both Marcus and Hadrian froze mid-transformation, their wolves forced back into submission so absolute they couldn't even maintain their partial shifts. Hadrian collapsed to his knees, gasping. Marcus staggered but remained standing, his storm-gray eyes wide with awe. Guards poured into the dungeon, drawn by the commotion. They seized Hadrian, dragging him away as he thrashed and cursed. Marcus stumbled to Eleanor, his shaking hands unlocking her chains. She collapsed into his arms, trembling and exhausted. "You were never the threat, Eleanor," Marcus whispered, his forehead pressed against hers, blood seeping through his bandages. "You were the answer." And for the first time since the execution pit, Eleanor believed she might actually survive. 2 weeks passed before Marcus was strong enough to stand without pain flickering across his face. Eleanor remained at his side through every moment of recovery, her presence a steady anchor in the chaos that followed Hadrian's arrest.
The fortress had changed.
Servants no longer flinched when passing nobles. Warriors questioned orders that seemed needlessly cruel. Seeds Eleanor had planted in secret now grew in full sunlight. On the night of the new moon, Marcus summoned the entire kingdom to the throne hall. The chamber blazed with torchlight, packed with nobles in silk and soldiers in armor. They whispered nervously, uncertain why their king had called such an assembly. Eleanor stood beside Marcus's throne, wearing a simple gray dress, her marked wrist visible to all. Marcus rose, and silence fell like a blade. For generations, this kingdom has been built on a single principle, strength above all else. The weak were culled. Mercy was punished. Omegas were treated as burdens, disposable, worthless, less than nothing. His voice rang through the hall, cold and absolute. "That ends tonight." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I nearly died because I believed showing vulnerability was weakness. But an Omega saved my life, not through dominance, but through power I didn't understand and couldn't command." Marcus's gaze swept across the assembly. "The age of Omega suffering ends today. I hereby enact the following laws. No Omega shall be executed without trial before the crown. No Omega shall be forced into servitude against their will. And any wolf, Alpha, Beta, or Omega, displaying ability shall be recognized and protected, not punished." Shock registered on every face. Some nobles looked outraged. Others appeared thoughtful. Marcus extended his hand toward Eleanor. She hesitated, then stepped forward, placing her hand in his. "This is Eleanor Conrad, bearer of the Lost Howler's mark. She possesses an ability our ancestors feared, the power to humble even the strongest alpha, to restore balance where hierarchy has become tyranny." His grip on her hand tightened. "She is my advisor. She is under the crown's eternal protection. And in time, when she chooses, she will be my mate." The hall erupted. Some bowed immediately. Others stood frozen, struggling to process what they'd witnessed. But slowly, inexorably, every knee bent, not in fear,
In awe.
Eleanor touched the mark on her wrist with her free hand, feeling its warmth pulse beneath her fingertips. The silver wolf head sigil glowed softly, no longer a curse but a promise. She had been dragged to the execution pit in chains, condemned to die for a crime she didn't commit. She had been called worthless, disposable, a burden unworthy of breath. Now she stood beside a king who'd learned that mercy wasn't weakness, and she'd learned that her power was never meant to be hidden. Marcus leaned close, his lips near her ear. "Are you ready to rewrite the fate of wolves, Eleanor Conrad?" She met his storm-gray eyes without flinching, without fear. "I already have." And in that moment, Eleanor understood. She hadn't been saved from the execution pit. She'd been forged in it. Did you enjoy this story? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one.